Race keeps people emotionally occupied. That's the first thing you have to understand. Not educated, not empowered, occupied. Emotion is expensive. It consumes energy, attention and time, and produces no infrastructure. That's why race is such an effective decoy. Because while people argue about identity, systems continue to function quietly, efficiently, and uninterrupted. Knowledge systems decide outcomes. Capital systems enforce them. Everything else is noise. So the question is no longer, who was black? That question has been answered, re-answered, weaponized, commodified, and exhausted. The real question is, who controlled translation, law, money, and memory? Until that question is answered. Let's start where most conversations refuse to start. Black communities do not suffer from a lack of culture. They do not suffer from a lack of creativity, resilience, spirituality, or motivation. The real problem is simpler and far more dangerous. They suffer from fragmented systems, not broken people, broken pipelines. This is not speculation, it is documented. When you strip away symbolism and actually examine institutional architecture, like the Central Kentucky Black Family Conference blueprint, you see something very different from mainstream racial narratives. That blueprint identifies 4 structural failure points. Knowledge is siloed, health here, finance there, education somewhere else, never integrated. Institutional mistrust prevents long-term coordination. Funding is short-term, reactive, and dependent on outside approval. And there is no coordinated leadership pipeline that transfers power across generations. Notice what is missing from that list. There is no mention of cultural deficiency, no mention of laziness, no mention of values. Race is treated as context, not cause, because cause lives at the systems level. Now zoom out, because local fragmentation does not happen in a vacuum. It is downstream from global design. Colonialism did not end. It changed operating systems. Colonialism was direct rule, flags, governors, troops, explicit domination. Neocolonialism is indirect control. Finance replaces soldiers. Trade rules replace chains. Education replaces missionaries. Technology replaces gunboats. And perhaps most important of all, local elites are trained inside hegemonic systems, then returned home to govern in alignment with external interests, not local sovereignty. This is not conspiracy. It is administrative reality. Modern neocolonialism works because it does not look like control. It looks like partnership. Technological dependency seals the loop. Control over data standards determines what counts as knowledge. Control over research pipelines determines what can be studied. Control over supply chains determines who eats risk and who extracts value. A nation can have a flag, an anthem, and an election, and still have no sovereignty. Because sovereignty without systems is theater. Now enter the global black cultural event, the Rumble in the Jungle. On the surface, it is remembered as a fight. Muhammad Ali, George Foreman, Kinshasa, victory. But that memory is incomplete, because the event was not just athletic, it was symbolic, it was political, it was economic. It was a global spectacle of black identity, transmitted across the Atlantic world, framed through Pan-African language, and consumed by audiences hungry for meaning. Pan-Africanism functioned as a symbolic language, powerful, real, emotionally resonant, but structurally incomplete. The event empowered people psychologically. But the capital flows did not change. The ownership structures did not change. The systems did not change. What changed was the story. And stories are easier to sell than infrastructure. This is not a condemnation of Pan-Africanism. It is a diagnosis of how it was commodified. Solidarity became spectacle. Unity became branding. Liberation became an aesthetic. And once liberation becomes an aesthetic, it can be sold without being delivered. This is where economic warfare enters, not with tanks, with arguments, because power is not maintained by force alone, it is maintained by plausible objections. So let's walk through them. The first always sounds neutral. It's not about race, it's about merit. Markets are fair. The best product wins. This argument collapses immediately. Merit does not operate at the point of entry. It operates after access has already been granted. You cannot merit your way into capital you were denied. You cannot compete in supply chains you were excluded from. You cannot outperform credit terms you never received. When someone insists outcomes are merit-based while ignoring access conditions, they are not being objective. They are laundering advantage. The next argument follows quickly. Why don't they just build it themselves? This argument erases history by pretending no one ever needed help. Every modern economic power, without exception, was built with state support, preferential credit, protected markets, and coordinated policy. Demanding success without those mechanisms is not independence. It is sabotage. That is not competition. That is containment. Then comes the argument that pretends to be moral. Supporting black businesses is racist. This is where the logic gives itself away. For centuries, racialized exclusion was tolerated as normal. Capital segregation was legal. Housing segregation was legal. Education segregation was legal. Opportunity segregation was legal. But the moment correction is proposed, race becomes irrelevant. Not during harm, only during repair. That is not ethics. That is defense. Then comes the most dangerous phrase of all: just support black businesses. It sounds supportive, it feels actionable, and it solves nothing. Consumer spending without ownership does not change systems. Visibility without equity does not create leverage. As your own critique makes clear, this slogan converts structural inequality into individual morality, a pressure valve that protects the underlying machine, the lie of just support black. It allows people to feel good while nothing structural moves. That is not solidarity, that is pacification. And when the analysis gets too close to power, the final shield appears. You're being divisive. Why make it about race? Why not focus on unity? Nobody accuses debt of being divisive. Nobody says trade agreements are too emotional. Only analysis that threatens distribution of power is labeled dangerous. Unity is only celebrated when it maintains hierarchy. Now connect the dots. Local fragmentation, global spectacle, symbolic liberation, structural immobility. This is not accidental. It is how economic warfare works in the modern era. Delay capital. Delay coordination. Delay knowledge transfer. Delay institutional memory. Keep the argument stuck on identity. Protect the systems. So let's end clean. Race is not the weapon, it is the camouflage.